Hello everyone, and welcome to Network Partners' Brunch and Learn, what a global labeling system implementation really looks like, led by Chris Heckert, our Senior Director of Labeling. A few quick housekeeping items. We ask that you mute yourselves upon entry, so note that myself and a colleague will actively monitor and manually mute participants as needed. Next, please be sure to address all your questions through the chat feature of our platform. There's a little text looking bubble box that you can click, and that'll bring up the conversation area where you can insert your questions. We'll answer all those questions at the end of this presentation. Lastly, this webinar is recorded, and you'll receive the recorded presentation as well as the PDF version of this PowerPoint that we'll go through. So without further ado, Network Partners' Senior Director of Labeling, Mr. Chris Heckert.
Well, thank you, Renee. That's the first thing I was going to tell everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, or good afternoon. I'm getting feedback.
Oh, yeah, Chris, we're getting some feedback here.
Hang on, I have my tech person right here.
Oh, that actually sounds better. And I'm going to go through and again, I'm just now getting to actively mute people, so that's okay. Part of it. But you sound great now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. That's what I wanted to hear. Hey, my name is Chris Heckert. I'm the Senior Director of Labeling Solutions with Network Partners. My webinar today is an overview on how to deploy a global labeling system. This webinar is basically part 3 in a series of webinars that started with how to conduct a labeling process assessment that talked about the 4 pillars of a strong medical device labeling process and choosing a global labeling system, where we talked about the features available in today's systems and the real benefits of a GLS. If you missed either one of these, I recommend that you visit the Network Partners website and download these webinars. There's a lot you can do to improve your labeling process, and there are a lot of reasons to procure a global labeling system before you'll need to know how to deploy a global labeling system. These webinars will be on our website as of next week, easily downloadable. So first off, what is a global labeling system? Well, there isn't a dictionary definition of a global labeling system, but the industry considers a global labeling system an integrated system that manages label content as part of an end-to-end labeling process that can be used without changes anywhere around the globe. If you have a GLS and you're not using it across your global businesses for all your products, you're not using it correctly. After reading that people believe information when you're able to enumerate that information, I give you the 7 basic steps to GLS deployment. You need to validate the labeling system on your network. You need to understand which sites and which SKUs are in scope and which sites and SKUs are not in scope. You need to identify, plan, and qualify your infrastructure of network needs, computers, printers, and barcode graders. You will need to evaluate your label data for correctness, completeness, and standardization. You'll have to migrate the data from the legacy system to the new global labeling system. You'll need to confirm that you did everything correctly. And lastly, you'll have to turn the system on in a way that eliminates the possibility of operator error or interruptions to operations. We're going to start with validation. This isn't your first step, but we'll talk about it now because you want to have eventual validation in mind throughout the deployment process. I spoke to this in a previous webinar. Per 21 CFR 820 quality system regulations for automated processes, when computers or automatic data processing systems are used as part of production or a quality system, the manufacturer shall validate computer software for its intended use according to established protocol. All software changes shall be validated before approval and issuance. So there's no dancing around it. You need to validate your labeling system. This isn't as onerous as it could be, or for global labeling systems as it used to be. The FDA guidelines for software validation are clear. They're old, but they're clear. The FDA suggests validating software per the V model. The V model starts with a user requirement specification. For those of you not familiar with the user requirement specification, this is where you define what the system must do. You will likely finalize this document with your solution provider, so keep that in mind. There's then a functional specification showing how the software meets the URS, which in turn is governed by a design specification that demonstrates that the software was developed to meet the requirements of medical device labeling. The solution provider will conduct the IQ, or the installation qualification, against the design specification, and the operational qualification against the functional specification. You, the user, will perform the performance qualification, the PQ, with your label data using your operating system, like Windows 10, and your web browser, like Google Chrome or Internet Explorer. The solution provider will provide all the IQ and OQ documentation and likely will help with the PQ protocol. So essentially, you are involved in the validation at the beginning and end of the V model. You write the user requirement spec and you perform the PQ. So before you begin your deployment, make sure that your user requirement specification is complete. If it isn't, revise it now. If you've purchased a software system without a specification, you should write it now, so it captures all your use case requirements. Your solution provider will have most of the validation ready for you. With these systems being so configurable, you should have purchased a commercial off-the-shelf system. The solution provider will have the functional spec, a design spec. They'll also have the completed IQ and OQ. You already have the URS, so the only thing you still need to do is conduct the performance qualification. By using the vendor-supplied IQ and OQ and their test scripts for your PQ, your efforts will be minimal. All you'll need to do is execute an already created PQ protocol that you customize to match your user requirement spec. The PQ is just to confirm that the software responds as expected when it is running on your operating system with your web browser. This simplifies not only the initial validation, but all subsequent validations needed due to software upgrades and to changes in your operating environment. Okay, that's your validation lift. So you've received your global labeling system and you are nowhere near ready to use it. So we're going to talk about scope. The project begins in earnest. And like any project, the first thing you define is your scope. This sounds easy and straightforward, but scoping your labeling project can get complicated. Your scope will likely include all products under your design control labeled at your site. But if you're in labeling, you know that's just a fraction of your products. Should it include your design control parts packaged and labeled at third-party sites? Should it include parts that you package and label but do not have design control for? Do you label other parts that are not medical devices? Do you print labels for in-process parts? Do you produce specials, customs, patient-specific parts? And are they in scope? Does your ERP system handle these parts in a way that allows for them to be in the scope? Should you include parts at different sites? And should you include parts that can be made in more than one location? You have to understand the implications of your scope. If you're centralizing labels that were once done remotely, do you understand the creation, revision, and approval process that you're moving over also? If you're adding a site that does not share the same ERP system, do you switch it over? Do you validate the GLS to another network? Or do you centralize your labeling service? If you're allowing suppliers access to your labeling system, do you have the appropriate security in place and do you have the process defined? And if you're labeling product that's not your design control, do you have a workflow that ensures that the design control holder has final approval? While you're establishing what's going in the labeling system, you also have to figure out how the labeling system is going to operate. That's where infrastructure comes in. The system should be owned by the business, but should be administered by information technology or whatever department is responsible for ERP systems in your company. The IT group will be able to identify the network interfaces to access the information necessary for the label. You'll want the software to interface with the system that creates work orders for production in order to get the lot number and quantity of labels. If you've got expiry dates, there will have to be an algorithm that calculates the expiry date based on the shelf life, which might be in the ERP system or your PLM system. So integration to other systems to supply the variable information for your production lots is important. You may have to speak up when the IT guys suggest collecting some static information like your brand name and your product descriptions from your PLM or ERP system. We try and dissuade this type of setup because the single source of truth, while an IT mantra, does not necessarily translate directly to the product label, and it opens up your sacred label data to outside operators. It's also helpful that the SAP short product description bears no resemblance whatsoever to what anyone wants on the label, and very seldom do the enterprise systems just have a table of brand names. If you have to create label content tables in your ERP or PLM system, make the argument that those tables are best housed in your labeling system. The best label systems work by managing your label data. If you cede control of that data, you will have hiccups as your current situation changes with newer enterprise systems or any mergers or acquisitions. If you do try to use this type of data from your other enterprise systems, it can work. If you can create the perfect label content aggregation system, it may work right up until something changes. For example, you'll acquire another company that doesn't use the same PLM system. They've got leading zeros. You don't. Or finance starts running a report using shared data that means you can only make label content updates during the first week of the month. If your data is being used for anything other than labeling, it just means your system cannot be optimized. You'll have to build an external process to confirm that the data doesn't change at the wrong time. You'll have a mislabeled product, but not because you had a system hiccup. You'll have a problem because Jennifer's out on maternity leave and Sam didn't know that he had to use the alternate format that allows additional characters in the lot field because the company you acquired a year ago has dashes in its lot numbers, right? The devil's in the details, and no one does details better than labeling. Just something to think about before you crumble to IT's will and abdicate ownership of your label content. Back to interfaces and architecture. Your IT guys may consider a single master server or a master server with slave servers set up regionally, or you may be using the cloud in a SaaS system. SaaS stands for software as a service. Your database administrator will have technical input into the design of the label content database. Based on latency, time on system, which can affect speed of print, there may be a requirement for a flat DB, or for other efficiencies, there may be a desire for relational databases. Your IT group should have been part of the selection process, so there shouldn't be too many surprises here, but they are your first allies in the deployment of your system. Here's an anecdote that I bring up because it happens more often than you would think. A few years ago, when we went to print our first labels out of our brand new GLS, and we were printing out of the production environment for a relatively small scope for our Irish manufacturing site, it took a couple of minutes for our printers to spit out our labels. And when they did, the 8.5 by 11 die cut label stock sheets came out black. I remember the feeling exactly because we had everyone there to do label verification on a Friday night, and I had to run out and get pizza at 8 because we hadn't been able to print a single label after 3 hours. It turns out that the amount of information going out over our network was huge compared to what we were used to. When the system went out and queried the various systems and their various interfaces, it was just too much for our infrastructure. The system kept timing out and it just sent a big black rectangle to the printer to complete the process. We needed to physically run new wires to provide higher data rates so we could print our labels in our office environment. It turned out that the production area already had higher network speed, so we didn't need to add capacity there. But we've since seen clients who have had to bolster their networks to handle the different amount of information when using a GLS. At this point, if you haven't done so already, you should identify the printers you're going to use and confirm that print drivers are available and compatible. You'll also, and for those of you who need to see different slides during a webinar, hang on, we're almost to the end of this one. You also need to qualify the printers per your quality system requirements. You'll also need to qualify the PCs or laptops that you're using to interface with. And since you've got to barcode your UDI, you'll need to qualify your barcode graders as well. We consider procedures as infrastructure, so you'll need to create a work instruction for the creation, revision, and approving of labels in this part of your deployment. You'll also need to create a procedure for production printing. And if you haven't already done it, you should shore up the labeling process to make sure your company understands what goes on a label, as well as who's responsible for this information. You'll need to have a process in place before you begin populating the new database and creating formats. You could couch this process in a data migration plan, or you could create the actual procedures for making labels. Either way, the documentation should be managed and approved per your document control procedures. You understand your scope. The label system is integrated to your network. It's almost time to populate your database with label content. But first, let's talk about the #1 schedule killer of any label system deployment project: data cleanup. You will not believe how messy your label data has gotten. You have label data for obsolete parts. You've got labels with old logos, obsolete brands, acquired company identification, different colors. You've got old true type fonts that won't print correctly unless those fonts are loaded on the PC that the printer's attached to. You've got labels in all caps because the 25-year-old dot matrix printer couldn't print lowercase letters. You've got labels with no patent numbers when they should have patent numbers. You've got patent numbers when you shouldn't have patent numbers. Some parts in the family have registered trademarks, others print the TM. Due to many, many reasons, you've got some parts with English only, some with 5 languages, some with 7, some with 18, 23, 29. And these multiple languages do not necessarily share the same sets of languages. Additionally, due to uneven interpretation of the regulations, you've got country of origin designations all over the place. You've got international symbols both with and without English descriptions. You've somehow managed to abbreviate circumference 2 different ways, length 3 different ways, and diameter 4 different ways. Your organization will determine that it's the time to clean up the data. And they're right. But this will take you 3 times longer than you expect, as so many different departments will have to weigh in on these decisions. Regulatory for any content change, brand for product families, QARA for abbreviations, marketing for font issues, legal for trademark and patent number revisions. As you decide, define, organize, standardize the elements, make sure you document these decisions and subsequent changes. It is vitally important to document and manage each and every change to legacy data. If you lose control of these changes, you will have lost the link to your source data. And if you've lost the link to your approved source data, you are in a world of hurt. Once all changes are documented in your change management system, you can move the data from the legacy system into the new GLS. Data migration. In the perfect world, since you've established your database structure, you simply have to move the data from your old database into your new database, being careful to arrange the data in the format of the new database. In the world that we live in, your legacy label system does not use a database, but a comma delimited text string, or Word files, or PDFs. You still have to move the data, but it's anything but simple. Your IT department may have someone that can crack your current code into something more manageable, but it's likely that some data will have to be hand-keyed. Your spidey senses are tingling. This is indeed the point in the project where mislabels are born. At this point, you're most likely creating Excel spreadsheets. It is imperative that the data in these spreadsheets be evaluated and checked and confirmed before they are loaded into the GLS. The rules of the GLS require comments and rationales for changing data. If you have to clean up the data after it's been loaded into the GLS, your quality system will most likely require you to manage and document those changes through change control. This is a good point to mention where a fundamental error can occur. When you set up your database structure or your schema, do not rush this process. Leave a column in the database for every type of element you have or will have on the label. Expect new elements to come along. So when you organize your regulatory symbol section, add a couple of TBD columns for the next medical device or sterile barrier symbol. Your country-specific area of the database should be arranged likewise. If you set your database up incorrectly, you're building barriers to efficiency for the future. Data migration also includes the creation of label formats. Depending on your system, your internal policies and procedures, you may have a handful of formats or you may have thousands of formats. There are pros and cons to each approach. It's easier and safer to make mass changes with fewer formats, but you can be very precise on individual labels if you have multiple formats. This is a decision that should be made based on your business needs, the amount of label revisions you anticipate making, any label validations that you need to leverage, any CAPAs that affect label formatting, etc. Once you have some data in the system and you have some formats, this is when you can conduct your performance qualification and complete your validation. Data verification. Your quality department should be very interested in this aspect of the GLS implementation. Again, in a perfect world, you can use machine vision to confirm that the labels that print out of the new system have the same label content as the legacy labels. This is a great way to document that the new labels match the legacy labels. This is really easy if 1, you have a machine vision system, and 2, you haven't made any changes between the legacy labels and the new labels. If you don't meet that criteria, and the vast majority of you don't, things become a bit more manual. While there are several ways to visually check to see if the new labels have the same content that the legacy labels had, a very basic method is 1/1 checking. This would be one person comparing all attributes and label content of the new label against the legacy label, and if all matched to the legacy label, the labels would be signed off and passed on to another person who would perform the same check. Is it perfect? No. It is, however, with the right people, an acceptable method. What we've done in order to bolster our confidence that we've had the right people doing this job was to actually test people with sample label pairs. 80% of the pairs are matches, 20% had discrepancies. We'd put that group of labels in front of a potential verifier and have them take the test. We wouldn't let anyone with under 95% correct be a verifier. After this 1/1 check, copies of both the legacy and GLS labels, which have been signed and dated as approved by the two individuals, are scanned and attached to the appropriate change notice to document that activity. Upon approval of this change notice, the labels are promoted to approved in the system. Go live. You've come this far, you're almost done, but you've got a full lap to go. This will be the event where management and the end users will judge the system. You could have done everything perfect up to this point, but only a small group of people actually understand what's been going on. Go live is when the curtain rises and everyone sees the global labeling system for the first time. In most cases, go live plans are shaped by circumstance. There may be an edict or a CAPA requiring a total switchover by a specific date, but many times it may be easier and prudent to ease into the new system. There are several methods to switch over gradually. It may be easy to switch products being labeled from one printer to the new system while using the legacy system on the other printers. This gives you a backup plan in case an unexpected development surfaces with the new system. It could be as simple as light print that's fixed by adjusting the temperature setting on your thermal transfer printer. But by rolling out the new system in a limited way, the hypercare and any collateral downtime is minimized. Once the system is up and running for a period of time, more printers can be switched over until the legacy system can be retired. Circumstances may suggest that the switch to a new system be done by product family, by product group, package type, packaging line, or building. Just be aware that simultaneously using two systems requires great communication, very prompt training, and well understood procedures and rock solid change management activities. Managing dual databases for extended periods of time should be avoided at all costs. It's going to happen. You're going to have your label content in both systems, and they're both going to be live for some time. You want to minimize that as much as possible. Don't let personal preferences dictate go-live activities. The go-live plan and schedule should be published prior to any switchover. Ideally, the plan should be part of the data migration plan, but can be formalized later as long as it's documented and is attached to a change notice for go-live. Once the system is up and running, ownership of the GLS should be transferred from the project leader to the owner of the system. Depending on your structure, the system administrator could be in IT, doc control, production, anywhere. What's important is that the GLS goes from a development project to an operation system in the manner of a manufacturing transfer. Roles and responsibilities should be predetermined and transfer formalized, so when the system has a hiccup, the appropriate person is notified and action is taken. Now, this has been quite a bit of information, and it's not as detailed as your system because everyone's process is slightly different, but that's because implementing a labeling system is a very significant project. Taking care of the details from validation to go live will result in a very powerful system that will not only provide the correct labeling for your product, but can do so much more. It can help you manage and control your worldwide inventory. It can allow you to delay labeling until shipment when you know the country-specific labeling requirements. It can help you coordinate and control rework activities, enable you to use configuration management to show different manufacturing sites or countries of origin based on where the product is made. With our staff of professionals, network partners can help you implement your GLS and then assist you in realizing the true power of a global labeling system. That concludes today's webinar.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris Heckert, for that. As of now and throughout the presentation, there were no questions. So if anybody has one, now is the time to go ahead and enter those into the chat feature. Chris, to your point, it was very informative, yet wasn't able to get too deep into the weeds based on other people's very specific systems. So if you do need extra or additional help regarding your GLS and the implementation, absolutely feel free to reach out to Chris Heckert or anybody else on the Network Partners team, and we can make sure to get your question answered appropriately. There is one question that just came in. Let's see here. For a medium-sized company, how long does it usually take to implement a GLS?
That's a very good question. That's very difficult for me to answer. So let's assume that, and herein lies the rub, right? If you're currently managing your labels, let's say you have 1,000 products in a medium-sized company, and you're using Easy Label or something like that, and you're using Adobe Illustrator files to control your label content, it may be some time before you're able to manually key in all the label content out of your Adobe files into a label database. That could take some time. We typically, when we lay things out, we try to get the job done in 8 months from beginning to end. For a medium-sized company, that would be fair to say. We helped a company with 17,000 labels get into a labeling system here last year over the course of about 4 months, but they had pretty clean data, and the cleanliness of your data and the form that it's in, the data migration is going to take the longest log, if that helps. It's a very general answer, I know.
I think that was great. Thank you, Chris. Next up is, could you share a few recommended GLS solutions?
Yes. Because the system has to be validated, you're limited as to the systems that are out there that are validatable. InLabel has a global labeling system that is validatable. Loftware Spectrum is a system that's out there that's validatable. Prism 360 is a global labeling system that's validatable. Innovatum's Robar has a validatable system. There's an artwork management system called Calic that's available. It's not a global labeling system, but some people have used it as such. And Esco Blue has a content management system that they are selling as a global labeling system. I'm not sure those are always those last two are the best fits, but those are 6 systems that are validatable.
Great, thank you. Does Network Partners provide GLS software or only the consulting for implementation?
We only provide the consulting for implementation. These solutions made by Prism, Innovatum, InLabel, Loftware are that's some significant software, and so we don't play in the software. We only play in getting the software to work for you. in your system.
Great, thank you. And then also as an addition, as opposed to just the consulting, also providing the resourcing and the resources to get it fully implemented and working for you. And then also nice label, this is just a comment, nice label can be validated as well.
Nice label can be validated as well. I was mistaken in leaving them out.
All right, great. Thank you, Chris. All right, I am seeing as can easy label. All right, great. Thank you so much, everybody, for that participation. There are no other questions at the moment. So again, thank you, everybody, for joining us for this Brunch and Learn, and to our speaker, Chris Heckert. If you have any labeling questions or need help, you can always reach out to a Network Partners team member, and we can ensure that your question gets to the appropriate contact. Network Partners now offers all of our previously recorded webinars on demand under the resources section of networkpartners.com. So there you can also go to register for upcoming live webinars as well as review previous webinars. Again, you'll receive this recorded presentation and the PDF of the PowerPoint presentation. Be sure to stay in the loop, follow Network Partners on LinkedIn to access our updates and future free webinars. Thank you again to everybody, and have a great rest of your Thursday.